Okay, great. Why don't we start? People may be coming in as we start, but I know some people have class at 1 o'clock, and so we want to start on time. I am Marissa Brown. I'm the Assistant Director for Programs at the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage. So thanks for being here today to hear Jeremy Dennis's talk. I'd like to begin before I introduce Jeremy with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, unceded homelands of the Narragansett and Wampanoag, who are the traditional stewards of this land, who have endured and continue to endure a painful history of violence and forced removal. We deliver this land acknowledgement to recognize the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land and to the Narragansett and Wampanoag communities today. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty, political and cultural rights, and the issue of restitution, and to commit ourselves to truth-telling about the past, to structural change, and to restorative justice. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jeremy Dennis, who is giving a talk today as part of our lunchtime speaker series, Public Humanities Now, New Voices, New Directions. Sorry, the slide says fall 2020. I'd missed that one. Spring 2021. Jeremy is a contemporary fine art photographer and a tribal member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton, New York. In his work, he explores Indigenous identity, culture, and assimilation. Dennis was one of 10 recipients of a 2016 Dream Starter grant from the national nonprofit organization Running Strong for American Indian Youth. He was awarded $10,000 to pursue his project on this site, which uses photography and an interactive online map to showcase culturally significant Native American sites on Long Island, a topic of special meaning for Dennis, who was raised on the Shinnecock Nation Reservation. He also created a book and exhibition from this project. Most recently, he received the Creative Bursar Award from Getty Images in 2018 to continue this series. Dennis holds an MFA from Pennsylvania State University, State College, Pennsylvania, and a BA in studio art from Stony Brook University in New York. He currently lives and works in Southampton, New York on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation. And Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your work.
Thank you, Marissa. And it's so wonderful to see everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to also share my screen. So I'll give it a moment for that to load. Excellent. And so I do want to do a 25-minute presentation on some of my work as an artist and photographer. You should be seeing a mural on the side of a building. Akwe, hello everyone. That's how we say hello in our Shinikak dialect. Marissa did a beautiful land acknowledgement, but I thought I would also include a map of Long Island and the 13 traditional tribes here in New York on Long Island. And so I'm from the Shinnecock Indian Reservation. The reservation is kind of an interesting term because usually we think of land that the US government gave to Native people after they displaced them. But here at Shinnecock, we're really lucky to still live on our traditional land. I want to start with my home community, the Shinnecock Indian Reservation. Just showing you a landscape photo I took of our community center on a wider angle and give you a little bit of background of who we are and what we're all about. On Long Island, we're the only federally recognized tribe out of the 13 original tribes. That happened back in 2010 after we received that title. I often get asked how many people are there. There's about 600 of us who actually live on the 800 square acre land of the reservation, and about 1,200 of us who live around the world off the reservation. And of course, to receive that title of federal recognition, you need to be a distinct community, have a lineage that connects all the way back to early historical time, and establish a genealogical tree to those early people. And so with that title, we got some benefit, some recognition, but mostly it was to pursue some of the lands that were stolen from us. This is our tribal seal and flag. I really love how colorful it is, but it's really complicated. One thing I really like is the symbolism. In the center, we have the box turtle with the 13 sections representing the 13 tribes. We were once whalers, so we have 2 right whales at the bottom in purple. The sacred thunderbird is on the left and the deer is on the right, being our nutrients. And it's just jam-packed with a lot of different symbols of what makes us distinct, which is amazing. I also want to share one of our landscapes here on the reservation called The Point. This is on the southern tip of the reservation. This is a communal hunting, fishing, and really just a beautiful marshland that's helped us get beyond some of those hurricanes, absorbing a lot of storm water, and just helping sustain us as we sustain the land. I want to talk a little bit about my studies and my work as an artist. I went to Stony Brook University here on Long Island, and later Penn State University for grad school. And so throughout my undergrad, I was attending a lot of different powwows, as many people on Shinikak do each year. And if you're unfamiliar with powwow, it's an annual event. Each nation has its own throughout the year. Ours is a 4-day version of that, which I believe still is the largest on the East Coast. And if you go to these events, you can experience indigenous dance, craft, food, and just culture as a whole, and get that experience of connecting, especially on the reservation. To me, powwow has always been a time when I felt that sense of belonging most. This is a photo I took back in 2013, actually on the stage of our Shinnecock powwow. If you've never been, it's about a 6-foot elevated stage that's in the shape of a drum with grass on top and a fire in the center. And so as you can see in the distance, all of the visitors and observers are below ground. They're watching from a distance to get that vantage point. But if you're a tribal member, or if you're indigenous and you're not even a dancer, you can actually go up on stage. I was able to do that. And I would actually say that powwow is very central to all of my work as a visual artist. As I said before, it's only 4 days out of the year, but I try to figure out ways to expand that throughout the entire year. One thing that's interesting about our powwow is that it comes from a tradition of the first contact between the colonists and the Shinnecock people starting in 1912. It was a reenactment between the two communities, and it wasn't until the late 1940s that we actually branched away and started our own powwow, especially going up to Narragansett in the Brown University area and learning the traditions once again. For years, I would actually attend these different powwows. My godfather, Keith Phillips, seen in the blue on the left, he dances competitively Eastern War, and he's really talented. He goes to every single powwow, and that's a big form of his income. And so I would attend these different powwows. I would just do these documentary shots, as you see here, different candid poses, dancers between or during songs. And so that was just what I was doing for a long time. After I went to do these for a couple of years and went back to school, towards the end of college, I was doing my art history and art criticism requirements. And one of the questions I had while sitting in these classes, learning Northern Renaissance, Italian art, things that art historians widely believe is like the pinnacle of art, is sort of where's the indigenous version of all of these biblical stories. One thing I really love about learning about this history of art and art history is that artists definitely had a central role in communicating biblical lessons, the morals of the Bible, depicting something that is so hard to understand into an image that's easy to kind of absorb. But again, I was just wondering, where's the native version of our stories? And so with my collection of different Native American dancers, people in our traditional pre-contact regalia, I began to combine these different elements to create my interpretations of mostly Algonquin or New England and Long Island stories. And so I'm just going to show you a handful, especially those that are more local to where I am. This is one called Manitou Hill, based on a very brief story that actually takes place on Western Long Island in a town called Plainsview, which for 200 years was actually called Manitou Hill until they wanted to establish a post office. And so because there was another town called Manitou Hill, they renamed it Plainsview. But what we're seeing in this image is a woman taking a sip from the sacred spring. And I believe it wasn't until the 19th or 20th century that this sacred spot was paved over for a local high school. And one more I'll share with you from this series is based on one of our local leaders, Begattikit, and his legendary funeral procession from Shelter Island to Montauk. If you're unfamiliar with that distance, it's about 20 miles. And just a little bit of background, I always think it's fascinating, and I love comparing it to art history. This is a direct quote to El Greco's from the 16th century, The Disrobing of Christ. I don't believe in the idea of like originality, and I love quoting or taking from other art to create this work. This is a project I started back in 2015, just changing directions, called Behind the Dance. And if you're familiar with Humans of New York, it's very similar in that same vein. The book, which I self-published, has about 100 interviews with portraits and interviews of powwow attendees, Indigenous dancers, and vendors. And this was actually a critique to my own kind of representation to these Indigenous creation stories, because as you develop as an artist, you start to realize the conflicts in your work. And so I was criticizing my own work and realizing that I was sort of perpetuating that whole sort of idea that Native people are stuck in the past, or they're a static culture. They only exist in that pre-1900 context. And so I'm just going to show a couple of this from this series. And the indigenous groups of Rhode Island are the Narragansett, the Neantic, Nipmuc, Pequot, and Wampanoag people. And so even though there's a lot of people from Shinikak in the book, I wanted to highlight some of the portraits from the Rhode Island area close to Brown University. And again, I really love this series because it just became a better way of understanding who these individuals are who attend powwows and make them possible. From my observation, most people go to powwows, they pay a ticket to get in, they walk around, eat fried bread, buy some jewelry, set up a beach chair, and just watch the dancing. But they almost never get involved and speak to Indigenous people when they attend these events. Sometimes they ask to take a photo with them, but that's not really interacting. And so I really love this series as well, because even if you look at me, I really don't subscribe to that whole stereotype of what a Native person looks like the very distinct cheekbones, a large nose, long straight hair. And so a lot of the people in the book actually, even though they were literally relatives, they felt like I was seeing myself in them, and I was celebrating that fact that even though we don't have that stereotypical look, we still are Indigenous people, and we're still here today. And so this past 2020, Shinnecock didn't have their powwow, so this is a project that I was unable to continue and take more photos of. But if there's any photographers here in this presentation, this is a really great project to pursue, even if it's not Indigenous subjects, because I'm a very shy person, and to have like an idea that you're working towards is amazing. And so since this book is published, I'm able to bring it to powwows, hopefully this upcoming summer year, and show people what they're agreeing to and what they're joining. As Marissa mentioned, I do want to shift directions to a project I started back in 2016 called On This Site. And if you go to the URL at the bottom, I won't go there now, but you are immediately faced with this map of Long Island. And for the longest time, it was a little bit limited to icons. Now, as you can see, it's multicolors. You can do land acknowledgements using this free and access resource. But essentially what it is and what started this project was the goal of preserving sacred indigenous sites through my experience as a landscape photographer, just going to each of these sites and trying to gather as much resources, references, texts, historical documents, and oral stories as I could, and just combine them into one free to access resource. And as Marissa said, the project became a self-published book as well. I did a couple of exhibits with it. The first one being at the Shinnecock Cultural Center and Museum on the reservation, which was a huge honor. But I just really love the idea of bringing Indigenous history, using landscape photography to different venues, including sometimes coffee shops, sometimes cafes and delis, and going back and forth between that and museums and galleries to present that work. And so we've all heard that cliche that Indigenous history happened such a long time ago, or even that was my great grandfather who committed those genocidal acts, not me. So I'm totally detached from it. And so with that in mind, I started this project immediately with that idea of site-specific histories, like places that we pass every day. How do you present history in a way that's totally relevant to our everyday lives, something that you can't ignore? And when I was growing up in school, I learned none of this history. Since 2016, I knew about those two reservations, but all these different polygons, colors, icons that you see are just from those past 5 or so years. The website does have 100 or so images and histories that are specific to distinct landscapes, but I'm going to show you, I believe, just maybe 2 or 3 in this presentation just to give you a sense. This is the Hawthorne site, which I photographed in August 2018, around the time of our Labor Day weekend powwow. And it's hard to see because there's police line, but there's 2 excavators. One in the foreground that's about 6 feet beneath the surface of the landscape, building a foundation. And the excavator actually stopped at a point where they found human remains and this distinct glass bottle. And the police detectives were brought in. They were there to investigate. They thought it might have been a murder scene or MS-13 or some other kind of association. And so when I saw that bottle that they found in the soil, I actually compared it to this bottle, which is just so distinct. It's not the exact bottle that was found, but as you can see, it's inscribed by Wobatom, one of our sacred Indigenous leaders here on the east end of Long Island. And so I knew immediately, thanks to the research that I was able to gather for the On the Site project, that yes, this is a Indigenous ancestor. They were buried with burial goods, and I brought that to the police, and they were sort of convinced that it was our ancestor. And so with that in mind, with it being an ancestral burial site and sacred site, Shinikak immediately went to try to fundraise to preserve the site. New York is actually one of 4 states in the United States that don't have proper unmarked burial site laws and moratoriums. And so we actually had to go on GoFundMe to try to preserve the site. They originally wanted us to preserve it for $185,000. And then they lowered it to $50,000. And what's crazy about that is that in each town in the Hamptons, they have something called the Community Preservation Fund, which is a 2% tax on real estate sales. And each year they raise more than $15 million just passively, people buying and selling land. And so I'm going to show you a map of some of our traditional territory and an actual historical map. As you can see in the dark tones, that's our traditional territory. The green is our current reservation, the land that we have now, and the blue star represents where the Hawthorne site of 2018 is located. And so in essence, they were asking us to raise $185,000 to go towards the preservation of a unmarked burial site in land that was stolen from us in 1859. And so the whole idea that colonization has ended at some special point, or that we're kind of a progressed people here now in 2021 is up to question for sure. I just want to show you the map, which is sort of the to-do list of the project. All these icons that are in red are sort of sites that I know are out there. I might not know exactly which street they're on or what latitude and longitude they're located on, but I know that they're there. They're an indigenous place name, or they're a site-specific history. But again, going back to 2016, I only knew about 2 sites on the entirety of Long Island. That was the sum of my public education. And so the whole point of the project is to make this free access, go at it at your own pace, maybe try to find your house on this map and see whose land you're on, learn about the original story of this land as part of American history and not distinct or irrelevant. And so it's so important to actually map these places as well, because as we all know, in a general sense, there's been 400 years of colonization and assimilation, especially in the Northeast. And so even though we were forcefully removed from our families at times in boarding schools, we were forced to interact with missionaries to convert us, and all this difficult history. But one thing that we always have connections to is our landscape. Even anthropologists believe that memory is bound to place. And so by going in these footsteps of my ancestors, I'm actually able to kind of have that memory and sort of that muscle memory of going back to these places as a rekindling of tradition and reconnection. This might actually be the last site that I want to share from the project. It's actually from 2019, and you may have actually seen a story on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah. I believe it was Michael Acosta who did a story or segment on the Chinnicock Monument. And this is actually a very nuanced and still happening story and developing story. There's only about 2 highways that go west and east from about the city of New York and to the Hamptons. And so one of the major highways that everyone takes actually intersects with our traditional territory, which is detached from the actual reservation itself. And so back in 2019, we started making these 2 monuments that are 3 stories tall, with both sides being illuminated by LED screens. And at the top, you can see the Shinikak seal, and that's what gives it its monument title. But at the bottom, where the yellow seal is, that's actually kind of like a slideshow that people can advertise on, rent for a day or 180 days or so. And that acts as a revenue for the Shinnecock Nation to develop our social programs, our preschool, hire people, fill in potholes in the roads. And so this is actually something that, like if you're looking for a call to action, we have actually less than 30 days until the Department of Transportation threatened to demolish these. And so it's crazy to think that like New York is like so progressive, and we have all democratic people and liberal people in the 3 branches of government, but this is still going on. And so this is something that that needs more dedication and time to learn more about. It's something I'm still wrapping my head around and understanding, but I'll leave it at that for now. I do want to mention a project I'm working on here on the reservation, especially with the lecture theme of new voices and new directions. I personally had a lot of like travel and program and exhibit events canceled indefinitely. And so I began to look inward and what is local and what can you do socially distanced. And so since June of 2020, I began working on an old family home on the Shinnecock Reservation. And I think that with COVID-19, we've seen how people of color have been disproportionately affected with job loss cases, and that overlapped with police brutality towards BIPOC communities. We really want to have healing at this point. It's really necessary for Shinnecock and other local communities of color. And so what I'm hoping to do with Ma's House is to actually, as an artist, lead this effort to create that space on a local level. Since June, we've been trying to restore the house. On the left, you can see kind of the desperate state of the kitchen, where for 3 years, you could just see a hole right through the whole side of the house. And on the right, you can see the GoFundMe effort, which is over 36,000 at this point. One of the really lovely things that I love to do in my artistic practice is attend artist residencies, which is a time where you can travel for a month. You just can focus on your work. You're given a space to work remotely. And it's a good time to look back at where you're living or where you're from, and just have that separation from daily stress. And so one of the 3 bedrooms at Ma's House will actually serve as a BIPOC artist residency. So if you're an artist here on this call, you can apply and stay for a weekend, a week, or a month, and just focus on creating new work. Going back to my On This Site project before I end, I do want to mention, if you're on Instagram, I've been working on this kind of daily ritual or routine since April 2020 of trying to find something every day. Today's February 9th, so I'll try to find some sort of Indigenous history of Long Island that happened on February 9th. If there's nothing for that date, I'll look for something in winter, something more broadly in February that doesn't have a date, or just something that has to do with the blizzard that we're currently experiencing. So every day I try to post something that's relevant in that same vein of trying to make it interesting and change it up. And then I do want to end just on ways that you can either get in touch. My website links back to the On This Site project. And then if you do know anyone who's either interested in Ma's House or able to contribute, you can always, of course, read the longer narrative of the project on GoFundMe, which my sister helped me draft. And so with that being on screen for a couple of minutes, I thought I'd stop sharing. And then if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer or go back to the slides if necessary. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was amazing. Just so everyone knows who hasn't joined us before too, the way we can do questions is just put into the chat box that you've got a question, and that will let me know that you've got one, because there are a few too many people for me to see the raised up hand icon. And if you got a question, then I'll just chat text you back and can unmute you so you can ask it. So giving everyone a chance to absorb everything you just presented, because I think, it's such a great, not just presentation, but all of your work for a public humanities center, because, you're kind of doing all of it. Even among the art making work, there seems to be such a wide range of what you're doing. And so, you're involved with mapping and digital humanities and monuments and public history and documentary photography and sort of this like historically inflected, really interesting, imaginative kind of photography and almost performance pieces that are captured in photography. So my question is, I'm wondering how you think about the relationship between the work that you're doing in all of its guises and politics. And basically what I mean is, I'm wondering kind of how you see, sometimes I sort of think that in these key moments, and I think we're in one of them right now, often, artists are kind of at the advance guard of politics in terms of working out and being able to kind of put into one place all of the challenges and of where we are right now. So I'm wondering how you think about the relationship between what you do and structural change and politics, and even kind of the question of, does art play a role in restorative justice, and how you kind of think about those connections?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Marissa, for that question. I think about that all the time, and even at the inception of like, where do you begin creating a piece of work, or how do you form your own style as a visual artist? This is a really strange. I don't know if it's a compliment or comment in general that people give to me about my work is, and the way that I present is, like I'm not like an angry person of color. I'm not like an angry artist, and my artwork is kind of something that absorbs into the mind, and later on, like at an idle time, people start to realize, oh, I'm kind of implicated in that whole narrative, or I have a connection to that history of colonization that I should probably do something about. And so I'm a big believer that um, when you look at Indigenous history and the politics of um, being involved or related to that history, which we all are, um, I think there's sort of a national stance, at least at the top, that maybe learning our history or connection with Native American people is something that's not a source of pride, or it's a source of guilt. And so I want people to take that sort of enthusiasm that we have from like the Last of the Mohicans, all of those music festivals, Indian in the Cupboard, and all those stereotypical movies. I want to take that enthusiasm and sort of redirect it in ways that are actionable, ways that direct it towards truth, towards the idea that there's still Native people here today and there's something we can do for them. And so there is an energy that's just misplaced. And I think that the more that you create as a Native artist, the more you create attention towards issues that you care about. And I just personally take that responsibility and made that choice that I want my art to be compelling and attract attention, but I don't want it to be kind of overt. But I definitely do have personal kind of aspirations and goals beyond myself. I want people to help Shinnecock be involved and use their resources and their influence and their um, different ways of helping us and make that actionable.
Thank you. I am looking on the screen for Nancy Jacobson, Jakubowski, sorry, who's got a question. And let me just scroll down and find you, Nancy, so I can give you the microphone or access to your microphone.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks so much for a great talk. I'm originally from Fairfield, Connecticut, so across Long Island Sound. I first learned about Shinnecock issues from that great documentary, Conscience Point. I don't know if you had any involvement with that, but I recommend it to folks if you can find it. I hope to explore, your website, and I was really impressed with how many sites you've come up with on the map. I have kind of two questions and comments. One, if you have time to get into some of your process with how you found those sites and how you've done your research on those. And the follow-up is, have you thought of getting this project on the curriculum of schools on Long Island?
Thank you, Nancy, for those two questions. Just a little bit of the process of how I find the sites. One thing that's so special about Long Island specifically is that there's a book called Indian Place Names on Long Island by William Wallace Tooker. And he actually published that in 1911. And anthropologists, historians, map makers have been using that information to create their own maps, try to get their own sense of translations. A lot of them don't have accurate translations, but still they are able to offer you general areas where these places were once located. He actually used primary resources such as colonial deeds with Native people to pinpoint exactly where these places are and their traditional names. Another really great thing about Long Island is that just in general, a lot of these places still have those names. So if it's not the town itself, like Manitou Hill, they usually dedicate like an off street or the main historic street to that name. And so what I've been doing is trying to take that information, which you can find since it's out there. It's just in like archives or library collections on a shelf somewhere. And I'm just trying to make it so easy to access that you could pretty much just Google these place names or these indigenous or Algonquin words, and it'll come up in your results. You asked about the curriculum. We actually do have a kindergarten to fourth grade Shinnecock curriculum. And I think it's really special because each indigenous community or each indigenous nation should have its own curriculum that local schools adopt and accept and incorporate as part of their annual education. And so what I'm hoping to do eventually with this information is turn it into either more of a narrative structure where you can just have a better understanding using storytelling, which we all love and absorb information through. I hope to work with Shinnecock Youth to create picture books. That's another way for kids to learn. And then turning some of this information, once it's all digital and searchable, into different timelines or maps so that schools can adopt it and use it in their curriculum as well. So it's part of a longer process, but it's definitely on the mind.
I'm wondering if you can talk, we met each other first, partially because I was interviewing you about the project that you were involved with at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a couple of years ago in relabeling some of their collection. And I'm wondering if you can talk for sort of a second about that project and your involvement and sort of what, kind of the whole issue itself of art museums, and even leaving anthropology museums out for a second, even just art museums, or we can talk about anthropology museums too, but kind of, what is being called decolonization in museums, but anyway, efforts to relabel artwork, to, share authority, to bring in Native voices in terms of interpretation of artwork. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that, if you could talk about that project too, a little bit.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Marissa. The sad thing is that I've never actually been able to go in person. I think I've either been traveling or it's been so recent that COVID has affected traveling. So I wasn't never able to see the Native perspectives at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, which I saw photos. Mine, they usually choose it for you and which artwork that they want you to relabel. And so mine was a beach scene by William Merritt Chase, who was one of the early kind of painters in the Shinnecock Hills. He developed the Shinnecock Art Village right across the street from the reservation. And so sort of out of the blue, they reached out to me and wanted me to be involved. And I think there were maybe about a dozen artists who were Native who already participated. And so I sort of worked with my sister. She's a really great writer. And we came up with something that just spoke about the pretty much what you can call gentrification, or the idea that William Merritt Chase and his investors, the Hoyts, who are real estate investors, were pretty much trying to redefine the Shinnecock area as this beautiful landscape, a place that you should come out, buy a year-round like apartment, or try to buy some of the landscape from the Hoyts to attend this school by William Merritt Chase. And so it is a really interesting story about how the land was redeveloped, how it is today as this real estate focused place. And still where the school was is unceded Shinnecock territory. So it is part of a place that we're still trying to gain back because it was stolen from us. And even the art village, which is maybe 2 acres of land, there's actually documents that he rented from Shinnecock. It was like $10 a year or $10 a month. And I kind of forget at this point, but eventually that was just absorbed by Southampton town, and it's still private lands now, and it's no longer the art village. But on a larger role of art museums, it's interesting because of course I'm an artist, a visual artist, and art museums are trying to both work better with artists and their collections. We're starting to see a lot of decolonized movements in museums, kind of questioning the roles of the board members, of the staff, how, like everyone knows, that art museums have a role culturally and progressively to make a better future. But at the same time, a lot of them are just like buying here and there BIPOC artists not really rearranging their boards or hiring people of color to have these kind of assignments. And so it's interesting to see just the ways that, like, out of the blue, museums reach out to you, want to support you for this like one-time thing, but they never want to consider you for like decision-making roles or higher up places. So it's something that I think we could just look at the news and see all the protests happening.
Yeah, thank you. And I put into the chat box if people want to see a couple of links to that painting and that project too at the Met. Any other, so, you know, one question I had too was just about you. How did you decide you wanted to be an artist? When did it happen for you? Was it before you went to Stony Brook or at Stony Brook? Because I know they have a very strong studio art program. So I don't know if that's what drew you to them to start with.
I actually went to a private high school, the Ross School in East Hampton, and they have a special curriculum. Art was a big focus. And so pretty much as I'm reconnecting with old classmates today, a lot of people went into dance, music, film, and visual art. And so I went to Stony Brook in undergrad actually as a computer science major, thinking that I would be like coding things for fun and taking that experience from high school, which was like working with Legos and working with logic and making these Flash games at the time. But then it ended up being like banking software and how to manage stuff like that when I went to college. So my second choice from that high school experience was visual art. So I continued with that. I would say Stony Brook has like a mix of like very awesome facilities, really great staff, but I don't think people think of that when they want to apply for grads or undergrad for visual art. So I actually changed my major and continued that way. And so over time, I started to really love drawing sketches of my classmates on pen and paper. I began to do oil paint and do the same thing, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So once I got to darkroom, I actually got to that point where I'm using like representational art. I can stage photos, I can do self-portraiture. So it was really a shortcut to what I really wanted to do and communicate ideas that way. And so, of course, going even more down the road of convenience, digital cameras became more available. The quality started to match film cameras. And so I just continued with that. And I've never actually had a art studio of my own or my own personal darkroom. And so as a digital photographer, you're able to have your whole collection just on your computer, and all you need is a desk. But a lot of my photos have never been printed. I don't know how they look larger than like 17 inches on the screen. So that's just the downside of it.
We have a question from Felicia next. And let me just give you mic access, Felicia. There you go.
Hi. So my question is kind of pinging back towards museums. And so I was just curious if you had, so like you talked about board members and people of color like being more integrated. And so something that I think about being a Native person and going into these spaces is that like the structures are really built against us, that, we're still having to try to like educate everybody. So I was just wondering if you had any suggestions for structural change, like related to these museums. So that way, as they begin to approach Indigenous artists, like how can they move beyond like decorative claims towards decolonial work? I was just curious if you had any suggestions or just ways of thinking about approaching this.
Thank you, Felicia. That's a hard one because like all of my dreams and ideas of how museums could change were disrupted by COVID-19, because even like essential people are being laid off, and people who have been serving museums have been laid off as well. And so my dream would be to actually have Indigenous people kind of full time on the staff. For example, I really love the Parish Art Museum. That's our local museum in Southampton. But that museum and many others, they have like one time a year Native featured artists. I've actually been on like the planning phase of art exhibits and programs, and usually it's like, okay, did this one native artist confirm, or did they say that they can't do it? If there's two native artists, they say, oh, no, we already have that one artist who's native, so why do we need another one? So it's just that sense of even still just maintaining that sense of doing the bare minimum just to make sure the public know that we're progressive. And so I would really love to see, like if you know there's an opening at your local museum or library or cultural entity, like a new opening in the executive director role or on the board, I would really strive to have them bring in someone who's local, someone who's active, a person of color, maybe a woman. And I think that would kind of enhance and really change the direction that we've been on, like the rail that we've been on for so long. Sometimes you need people with unique experiences, people who actually represent the community. And so I just see it over and over, just like museums bringing in people from really far away who don't really want to, who don't really know the history or the local sphere as much. So I'd just really love to see that change from the top, because if you put a person of color at the top, they're going to start to wonder like which other departments can be looked at and restructured.
Thank you. Dawn Campbell, I think you had a question too, and I think you should be able to ask it.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Jeremy, and I really appreciate your work. What's the status of the Shinnecock language, and how has that given you perspective that might be different from what we as English speakers might have?
Oh, thank you, Don. It's really interesting, the whole history of Shinikak dialect and language. One thing I really love that I learned recently is that Kokono, who still now has the island named after him in New England, was a Montaukett, and he actually helped John Eliot create the Algonquin or Massachusetts language Bible translation. And so from using that original translation, which was meant to assimilate us as Christians or praying Indians, we're now using in the 21st century to relearn and have language revitalization. And so using a combination of Mohegan texts and translations from the Tantaquidgeons in Connecticut, we're working with them. The Shinnikak has language practitioners, and the Unkachag do as well in Mastic, New York. And so Stony Brook University brought together these three different nations and these three different language specialists to actually offer a class at Stony Brook. They're meeting over Zoom, and the amazing thing is that it's only $50 this semester to enroll. And so you can actually probably sign up today. You can email me and I can send you that information. But as far as native language speakers are concerned, I think the last ones passed away in the 19th century, but there absolutely is a route to restore the language and make it better understood and more common today.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Why don't we, maybe we could put into the chat, or do you want to just share that your last slide again for your contact info and the and your web address? Great. Yeah, if anyone wants to capture that, go ahead. And I just want to thank you for coming to share your work. Thank you for your work. And I hope we'll follow along and we can come and, have you come back in a year or two and report back on all of your projects, from the mapping to your own artwork. Show us how Ma's house is going and how far you've gotten with the with that. Yeah, thank you for coming today. It was wonderful to hear about your work.
Well, thank you, Marissa, and everyone for attending. Next time you're on Eastern Long Island, you'll have to visit Ma's house. So thank you again, everyone, for listening.